Hello and welcome to Denton's Tales. In this video, I'm going to take a look at horses in Norse mythology, with three horses in particular. One of them the result of a very strange, intimate sort of, crossover relationship, one could call it, I suppose. Another a gift from a god, and the third a rather frightening creature that would seem quite at home in one of those old Hammer horror movies with the likes of Vincent Price or Peter Cushing in it. Two of them share something unusual in common, though, apart, of course, from just being horses, in that both have the wrong number of legs. Yes, one of them has too many, 8 legs, in fact, while the other has too few, only 3. Horses were an integral part of Old Norse religion, being very important animals, of course, in everyday life, used for transport, for communication, for assisting with agriculture, for every kind of assistance to the human population, and thus they became important in religion as well, because they became sacred animals in the context of a sacrifice, for example, or a bloat, as it was called, a sacrifice to the gods, and they were often buried with their owners to serve them after death. Many graves have been found of men and women buried with their horses, which were killed and put into the grave so as to accompany their owners into the next life. And a horse sacrifice, a horse sacrifice would have been part of any important religious festival, such as the Yule Blot during the midwinter festival, for example. And in fact, the horse liver was a very special treat at those occasions. If you got a slice of the liver, well, you were being very favoured. When one thinks of horses in Norse mythology, I suppose the first thing that would spring readily to mind with most people might be the horses of the Valkyria, the Valkyries, galloping across the sky as they carry dead warriors skywards to feast with the gods in Asgard, or Asgard as it is in English. But the three principal ones I'm talking about have nothing to do with the thrilling and romantic corpse-collecting warrior women flying skyward with dead men draped across their horses. One of them is Sleipnir, the 8-legged horse ridden by Odin, the Allfather, principal member of the Aesir gods and the ruler of Asgard. Grani, a horse actually related to Sleipnir and ridden by the great hero Siegfried. That's another one. And then there is the Helhest. Oh, the Helhest, yes. The 3-legged horse that belonged to Hel, goddess of the dead and ruler of Hel, the realm of the dead that bore her name, later called Helheim. There are many other horses in Norse mythology, of course. Some of them are mentioned in the sagas or the Eddas just as a horse that somebody happened to be riding on at the time without anything else really known about them. They're simply mentioned, as I say, as a horse that someone was on. Now, some of the horses are named, and their names are quite unusual, to say the least, such as Fencebreaker, Golden Mane, Lightfoot, Gold Tuft, Bloody Hoof, Very Quick, and Early Awake, which are all, they're all descriptive names, obviously referring to some aspect of the animals themselves. The first famous horse I'm talking about is Grani, the mount of the great hero Sigurd, or Sigurd as he's usually called. Now, he was a mighty hero. Oh, yes, he killed dragons, all that sort of great hero stuff. His deeds recounted in the Volsunga saga. And in chapter 13 of that epic, we learn how he acquired his very famous horse. Now, Sigurd was on his way to a wood where apparently good horses were to be found, and he was intending to choose a nice one for himself when he got there, when he encounters an old man with a long grey beard, one he's never seen before. Now, in Norse stories, when you meet a bearded old man, you can be almost 100% sure he is going to turn out to be Odin, though nobody never seems to recognize him, despite his rather obvious appearance, with, a big floppy hat, and, he's only got one eye, but anyway. Sigurd asks the old man to come with him and assist him to choose a good one. So, the two of them, they go to the wood and they look at various horses, and the old man suggests that they drive them all down to a nearby river, the river Buthuljon, and actually drive them into the river and that will sort out the good ones from the bad ones, which they proceed to do. Now all the horses promptly swim back to land, unnerved by the deep flowing water, all but one. A large, powerful, and particularly handsome grey horse, a horse that no one has ever ridden on. The old man tells Sigurd that this horse came from Sleipnir's kin, the great 8-legged horse ridden by Odin himself, and that it must be nourished heedfully, for it will be the best of all horses. Having said that, the old man, vanishes, gone. Sigurd names the horse Grani, and he goes off on great adventures. Grani, being related to the great Sleipnir, is of course a rather better than your average horse. The Volsunga saga later became the Germanic Nibelungenlied. Sigurd became Siegfried, and is, I suppose, generally best known to most people in that form as he appears in Richard Wagner's operas Siegfried, in which he kills the dragon Fafner, and Gotterdammerung, the Twilight of the Gods, in which he dies. And he's joined on the funeral pyre by Brunnhilde, who rides into the flames mounted on Grani. So that is the end of Sigurd, Brunnhilde, and Grani. Now we shall take a look at Sleipnir, the mighty steed of Odin himself, and his rather curious birth, to say the least. In the Hervor saga och Heidreks, or the saga of Hervor and Heidrek, Odin, disguised as he often was, and of course nobody recognizing him as usual, despite the one eye and the big floppy hat and etc., etc. He asks King Heidrek a riddle, and the scene goes like this. Who are the twain that on 10 feet run? 3 their eyes are, but only one tail. This riddle ponder, O Prince Heidrek. Thus it is, said the king, when Odin rides upon Sleipnir. He got it. Oh, he got it. I suppose the riddle really wasn't all that hard as riddles go, or perhaps the eye patch and the big hat thing gave the king a bit of a clue. Yeah. So, we have Sleipnir, the grey-coloured mount of Odin, described by the Allfather himself in the poem Grimnismal from the Poetic Edda as the best horse. And he lists all the best things that exist in the world, and the horse is pretty much, number one on the list. He is also the fastest of all horses, which I suppose he really should be, seeing as he has twice the number of legs of the average horse. He is stronger than any other horse. He can run on land, in the air, or even across water. And because of that, he is often used by Odin on his travels through the 9 worlds, even taking him down to Hel to consult with the dead. Now, Sleipnir was not just unusual in having an extra set of legs, nor his ability to fly or walk on water and things like that, but also in his birth, which was, different, to say the least. Well, some might even say bizarre. In the early days of the gods, a builder very kindly offered to raise a fortified wall for them, a great fortification that would defend Utgard against the attacks of the giants. Since, though Thor could easily defeat any giant with his great hammer, Mjolnir, so powerful and heavy that none but he could lift it, and able to shrink down to the size of an amulet, so it could be easily carried around, he was frequently absent from Utgard, leaving it, of course, unprotected. Now, the builder would complete the task in 3 seasons, but there was a catch. Oh, yes, there was a very, very big catch. He wanted the goddess Freya, among other things, in return for his work. Now, that didn't please the gods, but after some deliberation, they agreed, with some prompting by Loki. Well, that should have given them cause to consider the arrangement more carefully, but they didn't. I mean, anything that was supported enthusiastically by Loki should have been viewed with a bit of suspicion. And I'm sure were I Freya, I don't think I'd have been overly pleased that my fellow gods were willing even to consider using me as payment for a wall. Very flattering. They did, however, set very strict conditions. He must complete the work within a given time, and have help from no man. He must be on his own. Well, the builder agreed, but he asked, could he use his horse, a stallion named Svadilfari, to assist him? Well, seemed a reasonable request. I mean, it was a horse, after all. It wasn't a man. And, well, that met the agreed conditions, and the gods consented. However, the horse seemed to possess a superior strength, greater than any horse should. And with its help, the builder progressed at an amazing speed. And it finally dawned on the gods that there was trickery involved. The horse in question was clearly not your average common or garden horse, you might say. And Loki's support for the builder, well, that did arouse a bit of suspicions. He did have a tendency to be, well, shall we, questionable when it came to honesty. He could, I mean, I'm not going to say he actually lied, but he could be, well, economical with the truth, shall we say. Though how much he actually knew about the builder and the horse, of course, is questionable. Not that the other gods were exactly, of course, honest themselves. I mean, they were already looking for a way out of having to keep their end of the bargain anyway, especially the part about handing over Freya. So it was made clear to Loki that unless he did something to make the builder fail to complete the task, since he had been very keen on the idea in the first place, something very unpleasant was going to happen to him, like perhaps a very painful death, you know. Something that probably Freya would have been only too happy to give him herself. The next time the builder set off with his horse to collect some stone, a stunningly beautiful mare suddenly appeared out of the forest. A mare in heat, obviously, trotting seductively around the stallion, who went hoof over tail with irresistible desire, breaking his harness and racing after the mare, which had galloped off into the woods. The mare, of course, actually being, yes, who else but the shape-shifting Loki. Did what he did best, playing tricks, and in this case, doing it rather well. Mare Loki and eager stallion Svadilfari dashed off into the forest, pursued by the builder, and that was the last that was seen of either of them. Building work, of course, came to a stop. The builder was unable to fetch the required stones without his powerful horse. He couldn't carry them himself. But the gods had now realized that they'd been tricked even further than they'd thought. The builder wasn't quite what he seemed to be. He was actually a giant himself. Oh, yes. And no friend of theirs. And he was somewhat messily disposed of by Thor, who bashed his head in with Mjolnir. So the treacherous builder had been dealt with. The wall was unfinished, which was really, I suppose, immaterial, since Freya was now in no danger anyway of becoming Mrs. Wall Builder, much to her great relief. But where was Loki? For that matter, where was Svadilfari? They had sort of gone, disappeared, last seen galloping into the woods. As it happened, Loki's trickery had taken a more serious and certainly more intimate turn than he had probably intended. His deceptive availability, shall we say, becoming genuine, certainly as far as Svadilfari was concerned, and the pair had been doing rather more than just, chasing each other merrily through the forest, making the most of their time together, with the result that horse Loki became pregnant. Returning to his normal state would have been, somewhat awkward after that. I mean, baby horses are rather large, big. And for 11 months, Loki remained a horse, the gestation period for horses being 11 months, in case you didn't know, at the end of which Mother Loki gave birth to an 8-legged grey foal. He was now himself again, but he had a son, sort of, with 8 legs, which is unusual to say the least. What to do? This was obviously a very special horse. I mean, to begin with, it had 8 legs, which was a bit unusual, and he quickly discovered the things it could do. So, why not give it to Odin? Yes! Now, Loki was a master of ingratiation, and giving the chief of the gods a horse like none other possessed, well, that was obviously a pretty good move. I mean, he was going to score points with that one. I could just imagine the conversation in Asgard when Loki and his 8-legged son arrived. Ah, Loki, so nice of you to drop in. Where have you been for almost a year? The gestation period for horses is 11 months, Odin. I know that, but what has that to do with you? I was a horse. Well, a mare, actually. It was I who drew Svadilfari away and stopped that wall thing being built. Oh, that was you. Well done. But what delayed your return for so long? Well, I was a rather attractive mare, even if I say so myself, which I do, and I was willing, and the stallion was even more willing, and I got pregnant, so I had to spend 11 months lugging this around. That is a horse, Loki. Well, what else do you expect a mare to give birth to? And it has 8 legs. Oh, don't get me started on that. I know it has 8 legs. I gave birth to it. I thought it would never come out. Women are most fortunate. Their babies only have 2. But this is the greatest horse that has ever existed, Odin. It can run faster than any other, over the sea and in the air, just as it does on land. No horse like this has ever existed. And in honor of my great regard for you, Odin, I am giving it. No. I'm giving him, my son, to you. You now own a horse with 8 legs, thanks to me. Thank you, Loki. I'm sure I'll find out what you want in return soon enough. I want nothing but to please you, Odin. Yes, of course you do, and the sun shines at night. Still, you yourself are now unique. The first man to ever give birth to anything. Not really. I was, after all, a horse at the time. I wouldn't talk about that if I were you, Loki. As I recall, it was you who accused me of being effeminate, of being ergy, for learning satyr magic from Troya. But at least I never had a baby. You would have to bring that up. Yes. What an interesting scene that would have been. So, the horse was named Sleipnir, meaning slippy, the slipper, the sliding one. And Odin rides forth from Asgard upon the mighty Sleipnir, his spear which cannot miss, Gungnir in his hand, a weapon that returns to his hand after he throws it, with his 2 great wolves, Geri and Freki, running beside him, and his ravens, Hugin and Munin, flying overhead to gather news of what transpired around the world. And Loki had certainly scored points with the boss. It was a pretty clever move. It's fair to say, that Loki had somewhat of a genetic problem when it came to fathering children, since not only did he produce an 8-legged horse with some help from the stallion Svartalfari, but he managed also, with the female assistance of the Jotun, or giant, Angerboda, to father a gigantic wolf, Fenrir, and an even larger snake, Jormungandr, which means huge monster, a description rather than a name, and a surprisingly normal daughter named Hel, who would later be put in charge of the realm of the dead that bore her name, Hel. The name Helheim was a later title for it. And no, Hel was not half dead or deformed or rotting away. That was a later idea. She did not go around with maggots dripping out of her nose. She was perfectly normal. Loki is unique among the gods of any faith, I should think, in that he can claim to be the father of a wolf, a snake, and a normal woman, and the mother of a horse. Neat trick if you can do it. Family gatherings at his hall must have been rather, interesting, I should think. Guests would have been lucky not to be eaten by something or other. But in that case, at least, Hel would have been on hand to see them safely to her realm of the dead. And that is where we go next, looking for yet another horse with the wrong number of legs. But this one, not really as attractive as the previous 2. Helhest, or Hell Horse in Danish, is the white 3-legged steed of the goddess Hel, and on which she will presumably ride into that final battle that will bring the end of the world, Ragnarok. Though with only 3 legs, it's questionable as to how maneuverable he would be in battle, and not very easy to ride, I should think. He would have a sort of lopsided, bouncy motion. He'd be a bit hard to actually stay on. In folklore, Hel, in times of great disasters or plagues, was said to ride forth on Helhest, and to search for those affected, gathering them in with a rake, and taking them down to her abode. not a fiery place of agonizing pain and eternal torment like the Christian hell, spelt with two L's, but rather just a place where the dead went who didn't die in battle. Hell could even welcome honoured arrivals in her realm with a magnificent feast, very different from the Christian concept of hell as a place of sulphur and brimstone, laughing demons poking burning souls with pitchforks. And hell was not, as she is often called, the goddess of death. No, she was the goddess of the dead, people who were already dead. She didn't kill anyone herself. She never brought death. You could actually say that death brought her to, well, pick up the pieces, you might say. But the Helhest isn't actually a product of Norse mythology as such, as much it is of Danish folklore, sometimes described as going around the churchyard on his 3 legs and fetching death. Another saying that during plagues, hell rides about on a 3-legged horse, destroying men. There is an interesting old saying in Denmark that a person who survived a serious, usually fatal illness had given death a pack of oats, referring, of course, to the oats being a bribe given to the Helhest to pass them by. It was Jacob Ludwig Carl Grimm, one half of the Brothers Grimm of fairy tale fame, who in the 19th century theorized that before Christianity came along, the Helhest was the mount of the goddess Hel, reiterating the Danish folklore. Legends in that country had it that before any human remains were interred in a cemetery, a horse was buried alive first, and then it would later pop up again as the Helhest. Why, I'm not really sure. It didn't make a great deal of sense. I have to say I don't quite see the point. Why create your... Anyway, never mind. That's the bit of mythology there. There is an interesting old saying in Denmark that a person who survived a serious, usually fatal illness had, as I said, given death a pack of oats, referring to the bribe given to the Helhest to pass them by. And that's something worth keeping in mind, for future reference in time of plague, disaster, or whatever. So, for now, I shall say farewell and goodbye until next time. Oh, yes. And should, indeed, there ever be a plague, or you're stricken with some almost always fatal illness, you're probably going to go belly up, will you keep that bag of oats handy? Oh, yes. If you're lucky, the Helhest may be hungry when it comes, and it'll take the oats rather than you. It's one of those things where I suppose it's better to have something and not need it than to need it and not have it. Better to be safe than sorry. So, with that little piece of advice, should plague and disaster ever strike, I shall say goodbye